first presenter lined up, who is Tomos Jones. He works as the Community Archaeologist for the National Park Authority and is passionate about the subject, as well as being responsible for safeguarding the archaeological monuments within the Pembrokeshire Coast. He provides opportunities for communities, the public and other stakeholders to engage and learn about the archaeology heritage in the national park. So he is here this morning to talk more about all the awesome archaeology that can be found along the coast and how to find out more information. I will pass you over to him now.
Good morning. Sorry, my camera was playing up there. Thank you, Alex.
All right, thank you, Thomas.
We've already got our first technical glitch, but just want to say thank you for the first talk, and hopefully, I know some have mentioned some interference with the sound, so hopefully we won't have the same issue with mine, but I can see that the technical support are just monitoring that. So I'm just gonna give you a little bit of a flavour, basically. I know that some of the other speakers are going to be talking about sort of industrial related to archaeology. So I'm going to give you a sort of overview of archaeology. So I'm just going to upload the PowerPoint. Okay, so the first thing I wanted to point out, and because some of the others are going to be covering some of the industrial stuff, is I just wanted to highlight, and it's something that Alec was asking me when she was looking at having a preview of the presentation, was around this image. And it is an image of Mawrth. So you'll probably hear more about that later. So what I'm going to do is just give you a general overview, and you'll see that I've titled it as Accessing Industrial Archaeology. So this talk is really about giving you the information so that you can actually find out where you can find out more about not only just industrial, but archaeology more broadly. Unfortunately, as you'll see, there's just too many features in the national park area for me to cover them, and it's really difficult to select which ones, but I have done a little bit of examples of sites. So in terms of what I'm going to try and cover during this talk, I'm just going to sort of highlight the sort of the purpose of the national park, what our role is, and how that relates to archaeology, and then I'll give some examples of the type of stuff we try to do in relation to archaeology. I'll then give you a sort of bit of a brief definition of archaeology, and apologies if some of you are well aware what archaeology is. It's just to give you, maybe some of you are not so aware of it, so you'll have a better idea of what we do and what we're focused on. And then we'll look a bit at the archaeology in the national park. But like I say, I won't go into too much details because this is more about providing you with the information so you can access the resources. And then I will then show you how to access those resources. So I'll actually show some of the websites that we have. We're really fortunate in Wales. We have lots of different resources online. Unfortunately, sometimes it can feel that there's too many and it can get quite confusing. So I can show you where you can utilize the different resources. And then at the end, there's an opportunity if you want to ask me questions before I hand over to some of the other speakers. And you can also post any questions you've got if they, pop into your head as we're going, and then I'll try and answer them at the end of the talk. So the first thing I wanted to highlight, like I mentioned, was just the sort of the role or the purpose of the national park. And you can see here, you can see the area of the national park, which is highlighted on the zoomed in map in green. You're probably most of you, probably, if not all of you, are aware of the national park area. So I'm not going to go into too much details of that. You can see it on the screen. But I just wanted to highlight some of the statutory purposes. So the reasons that the National Park Authority exists and its work within a national park context. So it's all around conserving and enhancing, and you can see the different features, and you can see their cultural heritage is noted. So that's where archaeology sits under. It's under our cultural heritage. And then sort of tied into that is providing those opportunities for people to understand and enjoy those special qualities, including the cultural heritage in the national park. And then through that, what we also hope to do is we hope to sort of use those purposes, and then as a result of that, we're fostering the economic and social well-being of local communities in the national park, and you'd probably say in the surrounding area as well. So that just gives you a little bit of context why archaeology is important for us as a National Park Authority. So just to give you an idea of some of the sort of activities that we deal with to meet our purpose and to sort of, I guess, achieve our aims and objectives, is all these different activities. So things like delivering a talk for this event, so you've got activities, also things like guided walks. We have our annual Archaeology Day conference, which we, the first time last year, we delivered virtually via YouTube. And then so we've got those kind of stuff. We've got research, so we work with universities and we will try to further our knowledge of, you know, archaeology and heritage more broadly in the national park. We have partnerships with various stakeholders, and that can be communities, it can be with large public and private organisations and third sector as well. And that can be on things like if we're trying to improve safeguards, for example, in legislation. So we work with partners like the Welsh Government or the Historic Environment Agency, CADU. So there's lots of things that we try to do. There's also things like working at a local level with communities. For example, the Nevin Community Council, we work with them to try and safeguard the Nevin Castle site. So that's just one example. Other things, interpretation. So we try to provide information about sites, and that can be both on the sites themselves or also online. And that's something we're sort of trying to develop further. And obviously the last year with COVID has obviously taught us that there's so many potential ways we could do that virtually as well. So sort of other things, community projects. So they can be sort of community excavations. It can also be, again, working with communities on sites like I mentioned, Nevin Castle, planning. So we do have a function. So archaeology is considered through our planning function, and we do get support from the Dydd Archaeological Trust to help us with that aspect. And just some of the other things which kind of tie in with some of those other aspects are things like conservation. So we do try to improve the condition of sites, and we've got a brilliant team of heritage volunteers who are currently monitoring our scheduled monuments for issues, and hopefully in time we will get round to actually start to address some of the issues that have been highlighted. They're doing a really brilliant job. I think we've already had over 70 visits to scheduled monuments, so that's really good. And then some of the other things that tie in is engagement, and we also have some artifacts, and we try to manage them as best as possible. So that sort of gives you an overview of how we're trying to achieve our aims in relation to archaeology. So I'm just going to give you a very brief and very simplified definition of archaeology. In fact, I'm sure different archaeologists would, you know, find slightly different definitions, but I think the main aspect of archaeology is the fact that we're studying human life in the past through material traces. So it's all about the materials produced, and we're using them to interpret you know, the way people lived in the past. And the reason that I've said the study of human life in the past is very specific, because actually it's getting more and more difficult to define when do we stop archaeology. Essentially, you know, it can come almost up to the almost present time. So really that's why the emphasis is rather on people who lived in the past. It's more about how we might have lived, you know, in the more recent past, because it can come up with that. So hopefully that gives you an overview, and you can see the lovely characters from Horrible Histories there, who are probably giving you an idea of the sort of characters we might sort of study from the past. And that is both history and prehistory as well, so the time before we have writing and text. And one thing I always like to try to emphasize, and this is whether I'm giving a presentation to adults or pupils or children is it's focused exclusively on humans, unfortunately. So we don't have any room for dinosaurs in our study, sadly. They're a bit further back. So just to give you a sort of idea of the archaeological timeline, what I've done here is I've created this sort of almost simplified version. So we've got our sort of first, although it seems to be getting further and further back, but we've got our sort of significant human species about 3 million years ago in Africa. And then we start to get those first stone tools or the older one technology, as it's sometimes referred to. And so you can see that it's a broad period that we're talking about. But what I wanted to also emphasize was, so for the biggest bulk of our archaeological timeframe, we're talking about the Paleolithic or the Old Stone Age. And that runs up into, as it says here, about 9,000 or, give or take a bit of time years ago. So we then move into the Mesolithic. And what I wanted to highlight here was, whilst there are some sites in the Pembrokeshire Coast that come into the Paleolithic, it's very much the later phases. So we've got some cave sites, which are dated to approximately around 30,000 years ago. So we've got some sites, and that would be the period which we call the Upper Paleolithic. So it's the last stage of the Old Stone Age. But the majority of our archaeology, really, the traces start from sort of the Mesolithic. And as we move forward in time, obviously it becomes more concentrated. So the evidence we have gets more and more significant and more evident as we get closer to the present. And we've got the Neolithic there, so that would be the time when humans are starting to farm. So it's the first real farmers. We've got those monuments like the Treftadaeth and the burial chambers. And also the interesting documentary we had recently from Mike Parker Pearson on BBC, that covers that sort of period as well, and that connection with Stonehenge. And then obviously we move then on to the Bronze Age, the Iron Age, so those Age of Metals. Sometimes the Iron Age is referred to as the Age of Celts, and then we're kind of moving then further forward into the Roman, the Middle Ages, post-medieval, and then we start to come into the sort of industrial and what sometimes is called the Information Age in relation to the last century. So hopefully that gives you sort of overview of the timeline. So just in terms of sort of what material would we study as within the discipline of archaeology? I can see there's a question that's just come in. I will try and answer your question, and I'll do so once I've finished the talk. So in terms of some of the material that we study, it varies, and I've sort of come up with a list here, and I'm sure I've missed stuff, and some of these things will overlap. You've got your biological remains, you've got lithics or stone, you've got metals, you've got structures, you've got burials, things like fabrics, art, literature, landscape, and paleo-environmental. And there will be other stuff as well that I've missed, but it just gives you sort of idea of all these things will help us build a picture of people's lives in the past. And of course, the less of this evidence we have, obviously the harder it is for us then to interpret what life was like in the past and why some of these, for example, large monuments exist. So I just wanted to sort of highlight sort of how many records we have for the national park area. So you can see there the national park is outlined by the yellow outline, and that just is the definition of the national park area. And what you can see also here is you can see the red or brown spots, which indicate all the different records that we have in the national park area. And last time I checked, we had about just under 12,000 records, and that relates to sites, it relates to finds, it relates to buildings, it relates to historic landscapes, parks and gardens. So there's all sorts of evidence that comes into that. So what I wanted to do is just give you some examples of some of those key sites in the national park area. And it's just to give you an idea of the variety. Now, as I mentioned, then there's over there's almost 12,000 records for the national park area. So you can imagine it's very difficult for us to select sites. So what I've tried to do is just to give you a range of ones that cover different periods. So I don't know if you're going to be able to see the map, but I'll try to describe them as I go along. So the top one in the middle, so that one is, oh, hold on, I've got a message here. I've got someone who's raised their hand. Just check. Sorry, I thought I had a thing up there. Let me just go back. I will come back to any questions after the talk. Unfortunately, I can't see any that are coming up at the moment, so you'll just have to bear with me. I've got a little bit more to go on the talk, and then I'll try and answer any questions. Yeah, going back. So the top image in the middle, that is the tidal mill. So that's an industrial site. I know there's a quiz around this, so maybe some of the resources that we're going to come on to will help you sort of answer some of those questions. So we've got the industrial site. It's 19th century, that one. And then what we've got then to the, trying to think which way you would see it, but on my screen it will be on my right. So the top right, now that's from the Iron Age, it's from Castellfelfis. So that's sort of example of a roundhouse from that period. And it's one of the sites that we manage. And then down from that, we have a promontory fort. So predominantly these are dated to the Iron Age, but they do have evidence of earlier occupation. And what you will see in that one is you will see the ramparts of the large defensive structures that are running across the site. That one's really interesting as well because it shows the, you can see that previously in the past, it would have been a larger site, more extensive, but you can see that erosion has resulted in parts of that site being lost. And then if we go down to the bottom right, we've got the airfield at St. David's, so that's an example of World War II. And then moving along to the left of the screen, we've got Carew Castle, so we've got an example of a middle-aged castle. And then if we go on to the image on the left in the middle, and that's St. Govan's Chapel. So just another example from the Middle Ages of the importance of Pembrokeshire in terms of the Christianity and pilgrimage to the area. And then, of course, notably, one of our most notable monuments is Pentrefan, which is in the top left corner. So hopefully that gives you sort of an example, but there's so many more that we could cover. So this was just a selection that I came up with, but I'm sure I could have gone into much more detail on my selection. So I just wanted to highlight, and I mentioned the title was Accessing Industrial Sites. So it's important for me just to highlight how many features we have in the National Park relating to industrial sites. So we've got almost 2,000 records for industrial sites, and what you're seeing there on the map is the dots represent the areas highlighted are those records compared to all the other records that we have. So you can see that it covers a wide area and quite an extensive number as well. And it covers a range. So when I talk about industrial, in this context, it refers to all sorts of periods. So we've got prehistoric, we've got medieval, post-medieval and modern. And the largest predominant number was for the post-medieval era. And I guess that makes sense in the context of the Industrial Revolution. And 86% of the records relate to that period. So I just wanted to highlight, so they're giving you a little bit, a very brief overview of the archaeological sites and the national park's purpose in relation to archaeology. And I also wanted to highlight some of the sites that we have and some of the sites that you can use to find out more information. So what we've got here is just a list, and what I wanted to do is just briefly show you those websites. So we've got Archaeology, which is the Historic Environments Record, and that includes all information relating to archaeology sites. Listed buildings are on there. Maybe it'll be historic buildings. So there's all sorts of things on there, and I'll show you what it looks like. But that's a really good source. And if you know what you're looking for, or you know the name of the site, then this one can be really useful. You can just type it in, and then it will bring you up sort of records. Some of those records are held with the Dydd Archaeological Trust, so you would have to contact them. And obviously with COVID, it's a bit problematic, but I'm sure they've got an approach if you wanted to get your hands on some material they have. And the other one is Cofline. So that's the one managed by the Royal Commission on Ancient and Historical Monuments of Wales. They're based in Aberystwyth. They have this online database, and you can get all sorts of things on there. Images, again, it relates to archaeological sites, buildings. It can be, landscape scale stuff. So I'll give you an example of that shortly. And then the other one is Cof Cymru, and that's relating to archaeological sites, but also listed buildings and other things that are designated. So they have protected status in law. So I'll show you that one. And then the one that I wanted to show you, which is probably the one where you're going to find most useful, is Historic Wales. And that's where all these different spatial databases come together on a mapping system. And you can zoom in, and if you didn't know what was in an area, that one would be really useful, because you can zoom in and it will show you what different things are in that area. Unfortunately, for the last few days, and typical, just after I prepared this talk, I checked, and the access was no longer working. So I think there's an issue with that website, unfortunately. And then just two others, which you might find useful, is the People's Collection Wales. That one's really interesting, because you not only get this sort of maybe some archaeological information, you also get some really useful sort of maybe more recent history, and it kind of, some elements on that site are kind of more the intangible cultural heritage, which is also really interesting. And there's some all sorts of wonderful facts on there, so I'll show you that in a second. And then the final one is just our mailing list. So we do have a Pembrokeshire Coast archaeology mailing list, and that you can tick basically what you're interested in. So if you're interested in attending some of our archaeology themed events, or you wanted to get involved in volunteering, or you just wanted to general update from time to time, then you can do that. So that's also useful. And it's just worth highlighting that all these features, all these resources, they're all available bilingually. Obviously, some of the material on some of these sites, so for example, some research has previously been done, may only be available in one particular language, but they generally will have a summary of most of those resources in both English and Welsh. I'm just going to see if I can show you some of these. Let me just see if I can end this one, and then if I just onto the website. So I just want to show you very quickly how these look. So what we've got here is we've got Cofline. So I'm just going to put an industrial site in. So this is the one I mentioned that's managed by the Royal Commission. And you can see here, you can see it zooming in. It's actually in a slightly different format to what I've seen before. But basically, you can see it will provide you with a description of the site, and you can get some images, hopefully. There you go. So there's some lovely images there. If you wanted to use any of these images, you would probably need to ask permission from the Royal Commission, but you can contact them to do so. And you can see that this related. So I put in Porthgain. It's just brought in the general area, and then you can just click on these different features of that. So that's sort of a very brief run through Cofline. The next one is Cof Cymru, and that one is where we have those, so that the sites that are protected have the statutory protection, and they're managed. That protection is managed by the Welsh Government's Historic Environment Agency. So if I just very briefly show you how it works. So you just have to agree to the terms and conditions. You can do this in like I said, so you've got Cymraeg there. So if you want to view it in Welsh, so you can just click on the feature. So I'll go with Schedule Monument, as that's the most relevant. So again, I'll put in Porthgain and then search. And then what it does is it just brings you up basically the you can see, so this is showing you here the scheduling, which is the polygon covered in orange. And then you can click on details, and it will basically give you a summary of why it's been scheduled. So why it's protected, why it's important. So there's that one. Okay. And then also you can get a map, and you can print all these things off. So you can create a PDF of that. So that's that one. And go back. And then the next one is the Archwilio, which is, so it's the Historic Environments Record. So it's known as Archwilio in Wales. And you basically just click on the area. And if I just, again, put in Porthgain as our example, you'll see that there'll probably be quite a bit on here because I've put in a general term, but you can see here, so you've got slate quarry. And then what you can also do, which is really useful with some of this stuff, is sometimes you'll find there's images on Archwilio, but you can also click and there'll be some reports, and hopefully this will come up. So this is a desk-based assessment. So it's some research that was carried out on the site, and that can really be useful if you want to, find some, useful information about the site. If you were, say, doing some activity in that area, so that one is really useful. Let's see if I can get to the other one. And then this one is the People's Collection. Let's move that one. Oh, sorry, I'm going to move that out to the way. Let's have a look. Here we go, search collections. So if I put Porthgain in fact, I found some really interesting stuff on this site when I was looking the other day. You've got things, like I mentioned, more recent history. So you've got the images, the archaeological ones, but you've also got things like, so the WI did a visit from this area to the Millennium Centre in Cardiff to watch a show. There's also some other interesting things on here on this site, which you might not have found on some of the other ones, which is around the Great Storm of 1859. And you'll find that there's a newspaper extract which talks about people being saved from a ship near Porthgain. It's somewhere in here. Here we go. So Carolina, ship Carolina at Porthgain, all saved. So some really interesting stuff there. And then the other one I wanted to sort of highlight, and go to it, is Historic Wales, where all these different databases, bar the People's Collection Wales doesn't come on here, but all the other ones will be on there. And it's really useful because you can just zoom in and it'll show you the area. But for some reason, the site for some reason is down. So I'm not entirely sure what's happened with that website. I'll probably need to just make probably CADU aware of that one, just so they're aware. And then the last one I wanted to highlight is just our mailing list. And this is just, you just put in your details and you just tick what you're interested in. And when we have something related to that area, we will then obviously notify you that something related to that is going on, if it's an activity or if you've got a volunteering activity opportunity. So let me just go back to my talk. I just wanted to say thank you for listening. And I'll have a look now to see if there's any questions in relation to the talk. So I'll stop sharing if I can. I'll just see if there's any Q&A.
Hello, Thomas. I think there was something came in. I managed to answer that, and then we'll save any, if anyone else has any, we'll save them for the end, for the
okay, thanks, Alex.
The panelists. But thank you very much for that. Yeah, if you do have any questions that come up, please do use the Q&A function.